Very happy to be here. So my name is Théo Jaekel, as Raoul mentioned, and I'm going to give you a brief background on the issue of conflict minerals and what it looks like on the ground. So from my trips and visits to the DRC, also from South Africa, and trying to frame a little bit more about why this is a challenge for many companies. This is, of course, a topic that you could talk much more about than just for 15-20 minutes, but hopefully you will get a little bit more of an understanding what this is about. These minerals are minerals such as tin, tungsten, tantalum, gold, cobalt, and all of these minerals are a necessity for products such as laptops, phones, computers, tablets, and now even cars to function. Without these minerals, we couldn't have all of these products. So it's something that we use in our daily lives, and something that many companies use in their supply chains and in their products. Just to start off then with the definition, and it's important here to kind of define what we are talking about. If you look at, Raoul will go deeper into the different regulations, but there are mainly two legal frameworks when it comes to conflict minerals. A US legislation called the Dodd-Frank Act and EU legislation on responsible sourcing of conflict minerals. And both of these legislations, they narrow the definition of what a conflict mineral is to these four minerals. So it's tin, tantalum, tungsten, and gold, also called 3TGs. So within the scope of these regulations, only these four minerals are classified as conflict minerals. But there is also the definition of minerals from conflict-affected and high-risk areas. If you look at another framework that Raoul will talk about, is the OECD guidance on responsible sourcing of minerals from conflict-affected and high-risk areas. And they have a much broader definition. So they look at all metals and minerals, don't just limit it to these four, and if they are from a conflict zone or a high-risk zone. And this is the definition. So if you look at this definition, it's quite broad. Areas or countries where there are human rights violations, weak states, weak governance zones, lack of rule of law, which unfortunately often is the case where there are in countries where minerals are abundant. So if you look at the other definition, minerals such as cobalt, for example, copper, gemstones, diamonds will also be affected by this. So it's a much bigger issue than just these four minerals which receive most attention. Also from a global perspective, usually we focus a lot on Congo and the DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo. And this is of course because of a very long and bloody conflict in the region. But sometimes you forget that these issues are problems also in other countries, such as, for example, Myanmar, Colombia, Central African Republic, Indonesia, Afghanistan. In all of these countries, armed groups and rebel groups, the military, use illegal trade with these minerals to finance their own operations, and that's why they're called conflict minerals. So it's important here to remember sometimes companies think that, okay, if we just stop sourcing, for example, from the DRC, then we don't have this problem anymore. But that is not true, because if you're sourcing these minerals, probably you will be sourcing from a country where there are human rights risks. And important also to stress here is that if you want to deal with these issues, it's not a solution to say we're going to stop sourcing from the DRC, because that doesn't help anyone actually working within these industries in these countries. This is their livelihood. So if we boycott countries like the DRC, that makes the situation even worse. So it's more importantly to actually deal with the issues and have proper processes in place. But in some countries it can be very challenging. We'll talk about the DRC. But also Myanmar, for example. I don't know how many here know that the ongoing conflict in Myanmar is one of the conflicts that's been going on for the longest period of time in the world today, over 60 years. And it's daily conflict between dozens of rebel groups and the state military. And all of these rebel groups and the military have stakes in different mining areas and in different mines. and use profits from the mines to finance their own operation. Today, or a few weeks ago, there was a new report from, I think it was Human Rights Watch, that showed that the largest tin mines in Myanmar are controlled by one of the worst rebel groups that have been responsible for very gross human rights violations. And all of the main electronics manufacturers such as Apple, Samsung, Microsoft, all were sourcing tin from this area in Myanmar. And this is an area that is closed to foreigners. No foreigners can even enter this conflict zone. So to try to have knowledge and control over your supply chain in such an area is, of course, very challenging. So a little bit more then about the DRC. I mentioned the conflict briefly, but this is a conflict that has also, it's actually there is a peace agreement now, but the conflict, there is still armed conflict in the region, especially in the eastern part of the DRC, where most of the minerals are mined. And it's important here also that this is not a conflict about the minerals. The armed groups are not fighting over the minerals per se. They're using the minerals to finance their operations, but the conflict is a regional and ethnical conflict that has been going on since the late 90s, basically. And also it's called, before the peace agreement, it was called the African World War, because there was basically all of the countries around Congo were involved, and again, different ethnicities, different rebel groups. And after the Second World War, it's the conflict with the most bloodiest conflict in the world. Over 5.5 million people have lost their lives in this conflict. Also probably something that most of you maybe not heard about. So if we then look at the mining sites in the DRC, some of the mines might be industrialized, but the absolute majority of the mines are artisanal, as Raoul mentioned. So this means that there is not a company specifically involved in the mine with their own operations and big machines. It's more or less people themselves who now are maybe organized in different worker collectives, but they go to the mines, they find the minerals, they dig them up themselves, and then they sell them to different middlemen who then take them to the cities where they are exported. So this, of course, provides large challenges with health and safety. These workers often lack the right equipment. They're not provided with helmets or the right boots or whatever. And there's also a lack of oversight when it comes to safety at these mines. Some of these mines can be very large. This is a so-called open pit mine, a tantalum mine in the northern Kivu province in the DRC. And at peak season, there could be around 6,000 workers at this mine. But they are organized themselves within a collective. So they're not employed by a company. And issues could be, of course, this is very hard work. So for example, one of the workers that we interviewed at this trip, he said that, say if you start working at the mine when you're maybe 17, you are able to work for about 10 years. So before you're 30, your body is basically broken and done. You cannot work in the mine anymore. That is more or less the limit of what you can take. And of course, we all realize that when you're 27, 28, and you can't work anymore, and you're in a country as the DRC where there is no safety net, no fallback, you have nothing. So what he said, for example, is my pension. He said, my pension are my children. When I can't work anymore, they start working in the mines instead, and then they help me, for example. Other issues can also be the practice itself in the mines. And for example, in gold mines, there is a process where you use mercury in the water when you pan for gold. This is a legal method. It's illegal in the DRC as well, but it's still used because the alternative is usually that you need quite advanced equipment to separate the gold from the earth. But if you don't have this equipment, you still put mercury in it. And if you don't have the right safety equipment and you stand in a pool of water filled with mercury all day, you get mercury poisoning. So this is unfortunately a common side effect. Yeah, this is another picture of the same mine. So here you can see the metals or the earth is mined, and then it's poured through these troughs with water, and the workers are digging up the minerals from the residue, basically. So as you can see here, I mean, they basically have what they can afford themselves. It's no professional equipment or anything like that. Here, for example, when it's raining, these ditches and trenches, of course, can collapse. And if you're in them then that's also dangerous. If you look at other minerals, so that was, for example, tantalum, tin and cobalt, which is also used then in electric batteries specifically. It's more dug through narrow shafts in the mountains and in the ground. So it's not open pit. You go deep into the mountain or deep into the ground to mine the mineral. So as you can see here up in the mountain, these small holes, they are usually, this is our way up through the mountain. And I can tell you that this was pretty tricky just going up as it was, and we were kind of prepared for this. But if you're doing this every day with a backpack that weighs maybe 50 kilos, this would be very, very dangerous because these slopes can usually, it can be raining and they're very unstable. And the mine itself, as you can see here, it's a narrow shaft that more or less fits one person. Two people couldn't fit in the shaft, and it's maybe 10, 15 meters down. And the other picture here on the left, I don't know if you can see it, but at the top there is a plank of wood. And this plank of wood is their safety equipment, basically. They put it up to hold up all of that rubble and rocks from falling down. Of course, this is not any safe practice, and it's quite common that those kind of planks break. And if you're down there in the shaft at that moment, you're stuck. So this is a very, very dangerous work, and accidents and fatalities do happen. It's important here to note that there are rules and regulations in the DRC on how to mine for these minerals. Now, mines need to be certified to be allowed to actually sell the minerals. The problem in the DRC is because of vast corruption, it's quite easy to mix in illegal minerals into legal supply chains. We spoke, for example, to the Ministry of Mines in the Kivu provinces who are responsible for supervising and certifying the mines. They said that we have, in our province, we have, for example, 960 mines approximately. To this date, they had certified 45. And obviously, it's not just these 45 mines that supply the entire world with cobalt. It's also other mines with illegal labor and practices. Unfortunately, also, because of the focus of the frameworks on the 4 minerals, the 3 TG minerals, cobalt hasn't had the same attention globally. Now it's getting more and more attention. But because of that, the legislation in the DRC and the different international frameworks are more focused on these minerals. So the cobalt mining is still very much left behind. So for example, specifically there, some UNICEF thinks that approximately 40,000 children are working within the cobalt industry in the DRC. And the DRC supplies around 60% of the world's supply of cobalt. So if you're using cobalt as a company in your products, there is a high probability that it's from the DRC, and then there is very, very lacking oversight over the mining. Another example then just from South Africa to look at another country and some other issues with mining. South Africa, on the other hand, is the world's largest supplier of platinum. So around 75–80% of the world's platinum is from South Africa. And the largest industry using platinum is the car industry. It's used in what's called catalytic converters. So that's what makes exhausts more environmentally friendly. So all cars that need to have its EU regulation, US regulation, you need to have catalytic converters, and they don't work without platinum. So probably mining from South Africa. The issue here is, of course, it's more regulated and more stable than the DRC, but there are still issues with health and safety. This is a platinum mine. These are also mines very, very deep in the earth. You go down with elevators several kilometers under earth, and then you work in these narrow shafts so you need to be crouched all the time. And also accidents, of course, do happen. In every year in the platinum industry in South Africa, between 100 to 200 people die due to work-related accidents. And this has been going on for many, many years. And we still are sourcing platinum from South Africa because that's where platinum comes from. But this, of course, begs to ask the question, I mean, if, say, for example, if someone would die in a mine in Sweden, that mine would close the same day, and they would have to mitigate whatever happened and compensate the victims. But this has been going on in South Africa year after year after year, and still no end in sight. And of course, so this shows that someone else is paying the price for us to have, for example, clean cars and exhausts, or cheap phones. Someone else is paying the price for that. Of course, again, not saying that we're not supposed to source from these countries, but very important to actually know where you are sourcing from and make sure that you're actually improving the situation and not just continuing without improvement. My last slide here is just to show how difficult this could be for companies. This is a supply chain of a company, a German company called Nager IT. They produce one product, and it's this computer mouse. That's all they do. So if you compare to companies like Dell, Microsoft, Apple, they have quite simple supply chains. So this is a supply chain of one product. The green boxes are the suppliers, their sub-suppliers that they've actually checked and that they know that they have good working practices. The red ones, they don't even know who their suppliers are. As you can see, it says tin, nickel, tantalum, for example. They know that that's in their product, but they have no idea where it comes from. And this is not unusual for electronics companies. I would say that this is probably an advanced company that has done quite a lot of work on actually tracing their minerals. Some companies don't even know beyond the first tier, their direct suppliers. What's good, and a good example with this company is that they publish this picture every year. And every year they say, we are going to move the gray box, as you can see, where they haven't checked everything, a little bit further down. So get more and more green boxes every year. And hopefully after some years, they will be on the level of the mines and can say that we have checked the mines and we know where the minerals are coming from. So, of course, just to summarize, extremely challenging, but also extremely important to actually have control over these issues, because it's gross human rights violations, it's in conflict zones where people are suffering on a daily basis. And if a company just thinks that you can do business as usual in these zones, you're very mistaken, and people will pay the price for that. Thank you.